Wasn't there for the cuts she wanted to make in spending, and the actual cuts she wanted to put on taxes and the increases she wanted to put on spending, and that was the main point. There was never really any chance that she could develop her prime ministerial status at all, and she really has been the shortest serving Prime Minister, now, as you can see, on the way to Buckingham Palace to tender her notice to King Charles III.
Yeah, Andrew, for now, thank you very much indeed. Of course, the next thing that's going to be happening will be that Rishi Sunak will be heading towards Buckingham Palace. He will then subsequently be making a speech outside 10 Downing Street. We'll be carrying that live, but Andrew Simmons has been covering that for us in London. Andrew, thank you. Germany is hosting a conference on rebuilding Ukraine after Russia's invasion. The president of the EU Commission said attacks by Russian forces on infrastructure are pure acts of terrorism. It's estimated it will cost at least $200 billion to repair Ukraine's infrastructure. Well, in the early days of Russia's invasion of Ukraine, Irpin became a symbol of resistance. Now, as Mohammed Jamjoom reports, reconstruction efforts are underway to bring life back to the heavily damaged city.
Here in Irpin, which sits just outside Kyiv and stands as a symbol of Ukrainian resistance, you can still very clearly see the massive levels of devastation that this war has brought upon this country. It's been months since Russian forces withdrew from this city, and yet apartment complexes like this one still lie in ruin. That's because government money is largely going to the military right now. And it's also why residents' associations here are putting up signs on the sides of buildings asking for donations and providing bank details for those who wish to donate.
If we find funding by spring or summer, we could begin rebuilding our house, and by 2024 we would likely come back here to live.
The cost of repairing the damage to Ukraine's infrastructure has been estimated by the Kyiv School of Economics to be nearly $200 billion. Now, local officials here and throughout the country have been appealing to the international community for help in their reconstruction efforts. Here in Irpin, people are still living in less damaged buildings like this one. In this city, there were more than 1,000 buildings that were damaged and more than 100 that were destroyed completely as a result of the fighting.
We come back because we wanted to be in our home. Thanks to the authorities, we are slowly getting prepared.
We don't have enough building materials needed to finish the work. That's why we're asking charitable organizations for more help and supplies.
Many throughout Ukraine are doing all they can to aid in the reconstruction effort. But with winter fast approaching, temperatures dropping, and Russia targeting more and more of the country's power grid, Ukrainians are growing ever more concerned.
OK, our correspondents are following the story from Germany and Ukraine. In a moment, we're going to hear from Step Vassen at the Leaders' Conference in Berlin. First, let's go to Harry Fawcett in Kyiv. Harry, I understand that President Volodymyr Zelensky has been talking to that conference. What has been said?
That's right. He's been talking about the sheer impact of all of this on the Ukrainian economy. It's down a third in terms of GDP, nearly. There is a $38 billion hole in the public finances. And he said there hadn't been any of the $17 billion required in terms of fast reconstruction money to start with. There is something else going on as well, though, here, of course, these very concerted efforts by Russia to talk about a potential dirty bomb being constructed by Ukraine, something the Ukrainians, Western capitals have all denied, called absurd, dangerous, transparently false in various statements in response. Ukraine has called for the IAEA, the International Atomic Energy Agency, to send in inspectors to prove that its nuclear facilities are not being used in this way, and that has been agreed by the IAEA. Now we have heard from the Ukrainian nuclear energy company Energoatom, which says that Russia itself is doing something at the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant, which it controls. There are IAEA members there, but they say they're being kept away from the nuclear spent fuel area, where they say there is construction work going on in secret by Russians in charge of that facility.
Harry, thank you very much indeed. That's Harry Fawcett talking to us from Kyiv. Let's go to Step Vassen in Berlin at that conference. Step, what is the mood of the conference? Is there any optimism that the money is going to be supplied that Ukraine needs?
Well, that's a good question. I just put the question to Olaf Scholz, the German Chancellor, about the $17 billion that President Zelensky said has still not a single cent has been received. That's what he said in this live speech to the conference earlier this morning. And the German Chancellor didn't really answer my question, and he just said this is a good conference. So this sort of shows the mood at the conference right now. There's not going to be any serious commitments, no pledges. It's basically a big framework, and they call it the Marshall Plan for Ukraine, referring to the aid to Europe after the Second World War by the United States. So a similar big project they want to now put in place for Ukraine, but there's no concrete pledges, as I said, no commitments. It's basically a philosophical conference to get everyone together and think about how to proceed. There's a lot of criticism on the European Union for not living up to their promises. There has been a nearly 20 billion euros pledge, but only a fraction has been paid, and Ukraine is also struggling with the monthly budget just to pay their salaries and survive as a nation. So there's a lot of pressure on this conference, but as I said, we're not expecting any serious outcome today.
Step, thank you very much indeed. Step Vassen in Berlin. This is Al Jazeera. These are the top stories. Outgoing UK Prime Minister Liz Truss is on her way to Buckingham Palace to formally resign to King Charles III. She delivered her final speech outside 10 Downing Street, saying she believes in Britain and urged the country to be bold.
We reversed the national insurance increase. We helped millions of households with their energy bills and helped thousands of businesses avoid bankruptcy. We are taking back our energy independence, so we are never again beholden to global market fluctuations or malign foreign powers. From my time as Prime Minister, I am more convinced than ever that we need to be bold and confront the challenges that we face.
A funeral procession is underway for Palestinians killed during an Israeli army raid in the occupied West Bank. The Israeli military entered Nablus on Monday night, sparking protests. At least 5 people were killed in the city. Another was killed near Ramallah. Among the dead is a prominent leader of the armed group called Lion's Den. Germany's hosting a conference on rebuilding Ukraine after Russia's invasion. The president of the EU Commission said Russia's attacks on infrastructure are pure acts of terrorism. Those are the headlines. The news continues here on Al Jazeera after Witness. Goodbye.
Which side is winning, chaos or control? What does a new forever proxy war mean for America and NATO? As long as Americans keep consuming, prices are going to keep going up. Why didn't Joe Biden see inflation coming? How did we get so much wrong?
A quizzical look at US politics, the bottom line.
صار لي كم يوم ما مصورة ولا موثقة الأحداث اللي صارت وياي يمكن نتيجة الظروف الصعبة اللي يعني مريت بيها ما أدري أنا راح أحكي أكو أمور شخصية كلش وأكو أمور عامة بس بما إنه هني أختنق وإن كل شي يصيبني ولازم أحكي قررت إنه أنا أحكي للكاميرا.
اي شيء يصير اي خطر يصير تنسحبوا لي ويا الدقن
ويا الحايط
ويا الحايط
اي شوف هم مو يضربون بالنص تصير لما ركضه يرجعون يضربون بالنص فالركض ويا الحايط.
المتظاهرة أو الثائرة طيبة فاضل مواليد 2000 من بغداد، صار لي حوالي 55 يوم بساحة التحرير.
دهلي حلقك، لا لا تبلع، تمام؟ مضمض دبة 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 دبة. لا دهلي حلقك، يلا مضمض دبة. يلا 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 اخذي على الهوا هناك. كانت فترة طويلة يعني عبارة عن مأساة وقتل وجثث. هي كانت الطائفية وراها بدأت فترة 2009 وفوق، بدأت المفخخات والانفجارات. كنا نخاف نطلع، يجي العيد نريد نطلع نقول ماما لا، خاف يصير انفجار. هواي أمور صارت مو زينة، بعدها صارت مال داعش. يعني عندنا احنا الفواتح أكثر من الأعراس، وعندنا ايتام وارامل كلش هوايه بسبب المجازر اللي تصير عندنا. اوضاع مخربطه وما افهم. انا بياني كنت طفله، يعني ما كنت احاول اتعمق بالسياسه كلش، الى ان صارت الثوره مالتنا. أبات لأنه بالليل أكو ناس يحتاجون علاج وإسعافات لازم نساعدهم. لذلك أنا أبات بخيمتي، خيمتي هي بيتي.
التفاصيل الموضوع هو يعني معقد، بس صارت ظروف خلتني أتزوج عمره 14. بالتالي ترجع ظروف المجتمع وظروف القانون اللي ما فعل قانون العنف الأسري. الموضوع كلش يعني يصير ضغط، يعني خاصة طفل، يعني الطفلة بعمرها 14 سنة ما تفكر إنه خلص أنا راح أهرب من عندهم، بلكت يعني أجرب أعيش حياة ثانية. بعدين تنصدم إنه اللي تزوجته هو فد إنسان يعني همجي، فد إنسان حقير. أنا لبست الحكي كله، اختاريت إنه أني أنفصل قبل ما يصير إنه طفل، وقبل ما يصير ارتباط أقوى، وقبل ما إنه أني أحطم باقي حياتي وياه. كان الانفصال صعب لأنه هو كان رافض، يعني كان رافض الانفصال يعني، بس أنا أصريت على هالموضوع. هو اللي أنا عشتها بحياتي السيئة، هو اللي يصنع الشيء الداخلي يرفض، هو اللي يصنع شخصيتي الجديدة، هو اللي صنع الثورة اللي بداخلي.
أنا مطلبي أعيش بهاي الحرية. المرأة ما لها حرية بالعراق، ما تقدر تختار هواي أمور بحياتها. حلوة.
من قلب التحرير شنو أمنيتك 2020؟
أمنيتي العراق يرجع أحسن من قبل، بعيد عن الطائفية، وحقق كل مطالب الشعب العراقي. سعيد
يوسف، طبعا يوسف مصور ومسعف ومتظاهر بنفس الوقت. اخونا صراحه احنا صار لنا فوق ال 100 يوم عايشين، ناكل ونشرب وننام سوا بخيمه واحده. النموذج. طيور على اشكالها البحر. يلا حسين تعال نقعد. ثلاثة.
بس التحريك. مش نجي نسكر.
شنو تخاف يطلع وجهك؟ يلا عيد خاف على جوال. احنا جايين بدون ما احد يعرف الثاني وبدون ما احد يدعي الثاني. جمعتنا قضية وطن. بالصدفة هنا تعرفنا، صرنا اصدقاء وصرنا جيران وصرنا يجمعنا اكل ويجمعنا انه احنا من يصير ضرب احنا كلنا نركض سوا، احنا ايد وحده نظل. هنا أنا الكل اخوه لان احنا عندنا قضية.
لا لا. حاليا من ساحة التحرير تسرى الجمهورية. ضغطا علينا قرار مثل الدموع.
لا ايدك شو؟ سهلي حلقك لا تبلعه لا تبلعه تمام؟ دب مضمض شو اخذ؟ دنقلي لا دنقلي تعال يلا بس عوفوه بس عوفوه. ابتعدوا كل شيء نبي. يعني أنا أول ما أجيت قلت لوالدتي إنه أنا احتمالية رجوعي للبيت 10%. أحياناً تقول لي سافري اتركي الموضوع، أكو من يكمل بدالك، بس القناعة الوحيدة اللي أنا مقتنعة بها حالياً هو بقائي بالثورة. أي هذا؟
شنو تحتاجين؟
لا دا أشوف أكو عندي نورمال ثاني يطلع عندي.
عندي واحد.
يلا كلش زين، مو أنا جبت بس واحد طلعت مستعجلة. حاليا ساحة الوثب هذا رصاص حي وانا هاي خاتين هاي قعدتنا تمام؟
ما يعطي مجال حتى لو بالتوك توك انه يسعف المتظاهرين. التوك توك اللي يتقدم يحترق، اللي يطلع من هنا يطير راسه، لو بصوتيه لو بالرصاص الحق.
شباب اقعدوا فدوة، اروح لكم مرة خسائر، اقعدوا. هذا اقعدي. يابا الثورة عراقية والدعم عراقي والمتظاهرين عراقيين، وعاش العراق وغصبا على التبعية كلهم وغصبا على خلفهم.
والحياة والنجاة والسماء والأرض هل أراك سالم المنى
من يوم 24/10 لحد الآن أنا يعني أروح للبيت بس على قد الحمام وأرجع لهنا. قضيها بس على الساتر. يعني هواية إصابات صارت قدامي. وأنا يعني أنا هم تعرضت للإصابة بس ما دخلت برجلي. هواية ناس
يعني كانت إصابة يعني نفس الإصابات اللي شفناها إنه إصابة بالغة؟
دخلت يعني وصلت للعظم صارت فيها.
وين؟
هاي هنا برجلي.
شنو اهداف الثوره؟ كل من يقول يعني شنو اهداف الثوره برايك حتى ترجع للبيت خلاص؟
نقضي على الاحزاب، اهم شيء هذا.
وطن. احنا هدفنا وطن، انا اريد وطن. انا اليوم مطلبي اعيش كل يوم طبيعي بعد ما تنتصر الثوره ان شاء الله، اعيش هاي الحياه اللي عايشتها. انا قبل الثوره ما كنت اقدر اقعد بهاي القعده، كنا نقدر احنا انتم كشباب كانت تقدر بنيه توصل لهنا بهيك وقت وتقعد وياها شباب ما تعرفهم، شباب الثوره عرفتنا عليهم. ليش اني ما اعيش مثل باقي الدول؟ يعني هسه بغير دوله يقدرون باي وقت يطلعون يقعدون هاي القعده، ليش اني هاي القعده حرام علي؟ ليش اني هذا الطلعه والضحكه والونسه حرام علي؟ اني اريد اعيش بكرامه مثل باقي الناس، اريد حق.
احنا مطلبنا هو اسقاط النظام، مو مطلبنا يعني مطلب
اسقاط حكومه كامله
حول المطالب، لان اصبح المطلب معروف لدى الجميع.
اذا كانت هاي المطالب
يكون عراق مستقل، يعني ما ماكو احد يحكمنا لا احزاب، انه هو يحكم نفسه.
شو اللي تتوقعون راح يصير بعد المستقبل؟ اكو اصلاح؟ اكو امل؟
اكيد.
هي اكو.
اليوم صار 3 أشهر و20 يوم للثورة ضبط، واحنا معتصمين وطلعنا هواية جرحى وانطينا هواية شهداء وهواية معتقلين عندنا ومختطفين ما نعرف مصيرهم، ولحد الآن الحكومة ما اتخذت أي إجراء. راح يصير اكو تصعيد طبعا هو سلمي يبقى، بس التصعيد هو بقطع الطرق الرئيسية. انطيني بس لبسني اياها بالجنطة، انطيني اياها.
الله خليتونا السعب لك يا دامي واللي مو قبل اسمتي والجنعين
صور يوسف.
المظلوم في وقت الثورة بالدم بالدم يا حرام
تعرف لا
هذا طريق لا انا يلا
كتاب يا بلداني
يا تعال
نروح لمستشفى
خلينا نحكي بس
احمد والحسين عدل
بس باولي يحكي وياك باولي شوف قالوا يوسف ميت قلت لهم ما ميت عايش والله عايش
نروح لقول
باوع هسه خابرنا بس اسمعني بس خلي احكي خابرنا على تليفون يوسف جاوبنا الولد اللي اخذه هاي المفرزه اللي يم النصر قال اخذته للمستشفى عايش غمدوه وقاعدين هسه حالته شويه صعبه لكن اكل مجاوي ويصيحون واقول لهم يوسف عايش ما ميت لا تبكي باوي ما ميت
بس بالكندس انا خابرت بعد
ما خابرت انا كنت احكي وياك بتليفونه
لا مو بتليفونه
انا لميت مخه بيدي انا لميته بيدي
انا خابرت هسه للكندل الدكتوره بعد عدل
مو وقت تصوير ابد
يبا يقول ظلت بس صورهم يبا ظلت بس صورهم يا
انت جاي تاذينها هسه بالبكي والله ما مرتاحه بقبرها بالبكي لا تبكي
يلا علي وراح
مسيطر
يا رجال
ما يريد تاذيه
يا رجال
هي المرض كل شيء تشديني
يوم 1 يفصلنا عن 1/10 يوم 1 بس يفصلنا عن 1/10 صار لي ساعة أقلب كل الفيديوهات أحس اللي عشناه مرة أحس بفخر كلش كبير إنه إحنا تحملنا كل هاي الظروف القاسية والمقالة في لحظات أحس أنا موجة كلش كبير إنه إحنا انظلمنا هواية ومتنا هواية بسبب طالبنا بحقوق مشروعة. شنو يعني إنه أنت تقعد تتذكر أشخاص قبل فترة ضحكت وياهم وسولفت وياهم وطلبت وياهم وهسه تجي تروح تريد تحكي وياهم تدز ما حد يجاوبك إنهم ببساطة ماتوا.
اللي أريد أوصله للناس أجمع إنه هاي الثورة ما تنتهي ولا تموت، وهي طبعا انتصرت، يعني هي انتصرت انتصار عظيم، انتصار عملاق. نفس الوقت وإن قتلوا كل الثوار وحاولوا إخمادي، فهي أحب يعني أقول إنه هي انطلاقة، هاي انطلاقة، والأجيال اللي راح تجي بعدنا هي أكيد راح تكملها. الوطن باقي، ما حد يبقى بالأخير غير الوطن، وما حد يبقى غير العراق، وما نموت أبدا، ما نموت، ننتصر بسلميتنا.
انت ايراني، انت ايراني، انت ايراني، انت امريكي، انت امريكي، انت سني، انت سني، انت شيعي، انت شيعي، انت شيعي، انت عراقي.
A filmmaker follows her mother's return to South Sudan.
After years in exile, we came home.
And into a vice presidential position.
My mother stepping into the role that my father died in will not be history repeating itself. She will more likely be remembered for what she does in this new position.
An intimate portrayal of a family in challenging times. No simple way home.
People of South Sudan are watching us.
On Al Jazeera.
Watching the World Cup in 1982 in glorious Technicolor from Spain, I'd never seen anything like it. These players looked like they come from a different planet. And after that, I was all in on the World Cup. I think reporting from Doha, which is now my home, on the very first World Cup that's going to take place in the Middle East, that's going to be amazing. It is a hugely complex and often controversial event to cover, but once a ball is kicked, the passion and the excitement of football takes over.
This is Al Jazeera.
Hello, I'm Sahil Rahman. You're watching the Al Jazeera News Hour, live from my headquarters here in Doha. Coming up in the next 60 minutes, Rishi Sunak is set to take over as Britain's third Prime Minister this year, with high inflation and the slowing economy top of his agenda. Palestinians hold funerals for those killed by Israeli forces in overnight raids, including a leader of the Lion's Den armed group. Also, a powerful cyclone hits Bangladesh, killing at least 11 people and destroying many homes. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky calls for urgent international investment in the reconstruction of his country following Russia's invasion.
I'm Joanna Gajrowska with the World Cup latest. Qatar's Emir says criticism of his country hosting the tournament has been unprecedented and calls it defamation. while World Cup champion Zinedine Zidane tells his fellow Frenchmen to end talks of a boycott of the tournament and focus on the football.
Welcome to the programme. We start the news hour in the United Kingdom, where Rishi Sunak is about to meet with King Charles III at Buckingham Palace, where he'll officially become Britain's new Prime Minister. At 42, he'll become the country's youngest leader in 2 centuries and the first of Asian heritage. In the past hour, outgoing Prime Minister Liz Truss gave a final speech at Downing Street.
We reversed the national insurance increase. We helped millions of households with their energy bills and help thousands of businesses avoid bankruptcy. We are taking back our energy independence, so we are never again beholden to global market fluctuations or malign foreign powers. From my time as Prime Minister, I am more convinced than ever that we need to be bold and confront the challenges that we face.
Well, Andrew Simmons is in London and joins us now from Downing Street, where Liz Truss was speaking shortly. And it does also seem, Andrew, there were no regrets in that speech.
That's the standout, really. She didn't say sorry once. She seemed very relaxed, contained, and the most fluent for a long time we've heard. And the tone of it was quite defiant, really. That's the subtext, because she was more or less saying, well, it's not so much what she said, it's what she didn't say. The apology was one thing, and also any regret and expression of how things could have been different, or any explanation for how badly things went with the markets, or any explanation for why she sacked her finance minister without a lot of explanation, and why she handled the news conference in such an abrupt way directly after she'd made that sacking. She then restated all of her principles: low taxes, growing the economy, giving a lot of attention to levelling up in the UK, trying to equalise a distribution of money between the regions, and she also said that Brexit wasn't effectively being used in the right manner. So it was an unusual departure speech. It wasn't quite defiant in the extreme. And of course, then she went. And it was a bit of a non-event, really. It wasn't emotional. It wasn't overwhelming in any way. And it was the shortest term any Prime Minister in the UK has served as Prime Minister.
Now, there is obviously a protocol of one Prime Minister leaving, another one arriving. So just bring our viewers up to speed on where we are in terms of that rather intricate process.
Well, yes, Buckingham Palace has just confirmed that Liz Truss has tendered her resignation. It has been accepted. And so now the next move is for Rishi Sunak to arrive at Buckingham Palace and to be asked by King Charles III to form a government. That he'll get down to right away. He will, first of all, arrive here in Downing Street. Before going into number 10, he will outline he will make an acceptance speech and give more detail of what he's about, because we've heard very little. It's moved so quickly, this appointment. There wasn't even any voting, simply because no nominations exceeded the 100 required to make it into a contest. So he was just basically given the automatic flag to take the job, which is quite remarkable, really, when you consider how long was spent all the way through the summer to arrive at Liz Truss being made the leader of the Conservative Party and also, of course, Prime Minister straight afterwards. And it was, in fact, Sunak who was the runner-up. Now he's overtaken her and he takes control. How will he do this? He is the youngest Prime Minister since the 18th century. He's a Hindu, he's British, Indian, and this is a first. This is going to be a different approach. There is going to be a lot more expected of him. It has to be said, because of his financial background, because he's an expert with finances, and because he's going to target the economy, which is a total mess right now, and the British people want to see action taken to make their lives a little bit more tolerable.
Andrew Simmons there in Downing Street, thanks very much. And while Andrew was talking there, you saw pictures of that convoy of vehicles heading towards Buckingham Palace and entering the grounds. We believe that was Rishi Sunak, the incoming Prime Minister. Let's get more on really the Conservative policies and what he has to think about and how big that in tray will be with Ben Harris-Quinney, chairman of the Bow Group, a Conservative think tank, joins me now from London. Good to have you with us, Mr Harris-Quinney, on the programme. 5 PMs in 12 years, and one really does wonder how disillusioned the sort of Conservative membership and the Conservative movement is with the Conservative Party right now.
Yes, I think there is great disillusionment, and over the course of that 12 years, there have been a lot of promises made and a lot of blame laid at the door of the previous Labour government. But I think we're at the point now where Conservative voters, Conservative members are really starting to blame the Conservative Party for not delivering on a lot of those promises, and also, frankly, for the chaos that has ensued in recent years. It's not just that there's been 5 prime ministers in 12 years. It's also that only one of those prime ministers came into Downing Street off the back of a general election. I think there's an increasing feeling that what is dubbed in the UK the men in grey suits, or people behind closed doors at Conservative Central Office, are picking the Prime Minister of one of the largest democracies in the world. And I don't think that situation is sustainable for the Conservative Party or for Great Britain.
Well, we'll talk economy issues just in a moment, but can we sort of talk about the Cabinet? Because Liz Truss wanted her own supporters around her regardless. What can we expect from Sunak? Because without the party membership voting for him in this particular instance, he's, I presume, needs a mix of ministers that appeal to the Conservative masses, the MPs, and beyond those Conservative voters.
Yes, I mean, many people have come out today, Conservative MPs, and have said that they feel the Conservative Party is now ungovernable because it's not even just that there are 2 factions, there are many factions, and it's impossible to form a government that unites all of them. Certainly, I think Sunak will try to have a broad range of views in his cabinet, but I think the senior positions will be occupied by what you might call establishment figures. I think Jeremy Hunt will probably stay in there at one of the great offices of state, probably continue as Chancellor, and it's quite likely that you might see Penny Mordaunt come in. I would say it's fairly unlikely that you'll see a figure like Suella Braverman, who has become a darling of the right of the Conservative Party and has reiterated some of those past promises on immigration. But I don't see how her views are going to be compatible with Sunak, as they weren't compatible with Truss.
OK, so Rishi Sunak, is he really any different to the PMs who've all promised untainted conservatism? I mean, aren't they sort of out of ideas, having sort of governed, as you have been quoted, as left of Tony Blair? What did you mean by that?
Well, what I meant by that is if you look at each area of policy, the Conservatives came in 2010 promising to cut the national debt. They've tripled it. They promised to cut taxes. We have the highest tax burden since the war, certainly much higher than under Tony Blair. We have higher levels of annual immigration to the United Kingdom, both legal and illegal, than under Blair. And I think a lot of people feel that what is often dubbed woke has really taken hold over the last decade. So it would actually be hard to find a policy area where they weren't to the left of Blair if you actually look at the policies implemented and the data and the figures rather than the rhetoric. Do I think Rishi Sunak will reverse that? Certainly not. I think there is a deep chasm that exists between the Conservative movement, the Brexit movement, and Conservative MPs. And I think that is coming home to roost. And you can see that in the polling numbers with the highest proportion actually of voters who voted for Conservatives, voted for the Conservative Party in 2019, now switching to none of the above rather than switching across to Labour. So there's a lot of people who are small C Conservatives who feel that they are now politically homeless because the Conservative Party no longer represents them.
I mean, the economy itself is a huge challenge in all aspects, and we know all about it. We've been hearing all about it for months now. No other European country or global nation is exempt from the economic problems that they're facing. But Sunak talks of fiscal responsibility. I'm just wondering whether the British public need to brace themselves for the worst.
Well, look, I mean, it's absolutely necessary. The Bow Group has identified 250 billion in cuts that we don't think will affect public services, and they include things like HS2, net zero, international aid. But there's no question that cuts have to be made. And the market reaction to the mini budgets wasn't because of tax cuts. It was because, as an overall picture, the markets felt that the British government was spending, borrowing and printing well beyond its means. And that's where we've been for some time. You know, every great crisis, coronavirus, cost of living, energy crisis has been solved by more borrowing and more printing money. And of course, that situation is unsustainable. If it carries on, we'll have another debt crisis like we did in 2008. So it is of utmost importance that those books are balanced. It will be incredibly controversial, however, the debate as to where those cuts should fall.
It'd be very interesting indeed. Ben Harris-Quinny there. Thanks very much for joining us from London. And of course, let's take you back to London. And amongst all the greenery of the British capital, there is Buckingham Palace, where Rishi Sunak is now meeting King Charles III to ask for permission, and for that permission to be granted by the King to form the next British government. We will, of course, be going back not only to London, but also to Downing Street, where Rishi Sunak is expected to speak. About a mile away from Buckingham Palace, Downing Street, Whitehall, the Mall. Takes about 15 minutes to get there. Rishi Sunak could also take the number 24 bus, but I doubt he'll be doing that on this very important day. Plenty more ahead here on the Al Jazeera News Hour, including how a US investigation into Huawei led to spy charges against 2 Chinese intelligence officers. Qatar is pledging to host the first carbon-neutral Football World Cup. We take a look at the challenges facing the tiny Gulf nation. A funeral procession is underway for Palestinians killed during an Israeli army raid in the occupied West Bank. The Israeli military entered Nablus on Monday night, sparking protests. At least 25 people were killed in the city. Another was killed near Ramallah. Amongst the dead is a prominent leader of the armed group called the Lion's Den. Nida Ibrahim is at the funeral in Nablus.
We are here in Nablus now, where the funeral procession has started. As you can hear behind me, the sound of gunshots. Very loud. Armed men are shooting in the air, mourning the death of 6 Palestinians since the beginning of the year. And throughout all the tension that we've been covering here in the occupied West Bank, we haven't had one day that we've seen 6 Palestinians killed in one day. 5 of them are here in Nablus. And as you can see, the procession is going on. We're seeing people carrying the Palestinians who were killed. One of them is Wadi' al-Hawah. He is very prominent here in Nablus, known as one of the leaders of the Lion's Den group. This group has been gaining a lot of popularity lately because Palestinians say that it is defying Israel, that it's conducting shooting attacks and conducting attacks that have led to the killing of Israeli soldiers. This is why Israel has been cracking down on this group of Palestinians. They are belonging to different Palestinian factions. They're mobilized by themselves. And we've been hearing in the past few weeks that there were efforts by the Palestinian Authority to try and convince some of the armed men in Nablus to hand over their weapons and to be engaged in the Palestinian Security Forces ranks. People here were saying that Wadi' al-Hawah, one of those who were killed, has refused to hand over his weapon. And there has been a state of support. There has been a wave of support for these Palestinians who are taking up arms and fighting the Israeli occupation.
Bernard Smith is in West Jerusalem with more on Israel's reaction.
We've been told that Israel's Prime Minister Yair Lapid and Defence Minister Benny Gantz watched this operation in Nablus overnight from the security and military headquarters in Tel Aviv. They say that Yair Lapid was on the radio earlier on this morning, and he said they were working for several days on what is a complex operation. He says the goal is to prevent terrorism inside Israel and in the settlements. Now, Israel also says, the military says, that they expect this Lion's Den group to take revenge for what happened last night in the coming days. So they remain on quite high security alert there. They blame the Lion's Den group for a series of attacks in recent months, and the belief is that they're trying to clamp down on this group before it gathers momentum, before it gets bigger. It's a relatively new group, viewed as being non-sectarian, viewed as being secular, and the Israeli security services, the view here is want to stop this group before it expands. It's also very important to mention that we are only 1 week away from a general election here in Israel, the 5th in 4 years. Israelis vote on security matters. The timing of this event is certainly very helpful to Yair Lapid and to Benny Gantz. He's hoping that come the election there'll be enough of a coalition that he can bring together, that he can form the next government. Snapping at his heels is Benjamin Netanyahu, looking at a comeback. Current polls actually give Netanyahu's Likud and its coalition just about the largest party in power, but not perhaps with enough seats to form a government. So anything that makes the current Prime Minister look good and tough on security is not going to do him any harm.
So let's take a closer look at what we know about the Lion's Den. Now, members of the armed group first appeared in public in Nablus in the occupied West Bank last month. They recited what they called a charter of resistance during a memorial service for 2 Palestinians killed by Israeli forces. And since then, the Lion's Den has claimed responsibility for a number of attacks on military checkpoints and illegal settlements in Nablus. Ibrahim Yunus is a media coordinator for the Palestinian Youth Movement. He says the Lion's Den armed group has emerged in response to Israeli attacks on young Palestinians.
To understand the perspective of Palestinian youth in the West Bank, you have to look at a situation where there's 800,000 settlers who are illegally occupying a great percentage of the land there. You have constant daily attacks on Palestinian youth who are, whether they're crossing checkpoints, whether they're walking to school or to work. The number of young Palestinians run over by cars or attacked by settlers is large. So obviously there's going to be a lot of popularity among youth in the West Bank when a group says that they're not going to accept the presence of these settlers on their land. They emerged out of a group of youth who defend the city, essentially, from Israeli incursions, and decided to create a more formal group that would defend the city, which is where the group name and organizational structure sort of emerged. They do not have a working relationship with the Palestinian Authority. So the Palestinian Authority at the higher levels collaborates with or coordinates security with Israel, and the Lion's Den does not. So they do not have a formal relationship.
Germany is hosting a conference on rebuilding Ukraine after Russia's invasion. Now, the president of the EU Commission said attacks by Russian forces on infrastructure are pure acts of terrorism. It's estimated it'll cost at least $200 billion to repair Ukraine's infrastructure. In the early days of Russia's invasion of Ukraine, Irpin became a symbol of resistance. Now, as Mohammed Jamjoon reports, reconstruction efforts are underway to bring life back to the heavily damaged city.
Here in Irpin, which sits just outside Kyiv and stands as a symbol of Ukrainian resistance, you can still very clearly see the massive levels of devastation that this war has brought upon this country. It's been months since Russian forces withdrew from this city, and yet apartment complexes like this one still lie in ruin. That's because government money is largely going to the military right now. And it's also why residents' associations here are putting up signs on the sides of buildings asking for donations and providing bank details for those who wish to donate.
If we find funding by spring or summer, we could begin rebuilding our house, and by 2024 we would likely come back here to live.
The cost of repairing the damage to Ukraine's infrastructure has been estimated by the Kyiv School of Economics to be nearly $200 billion. Now, local officials here and throughout the country have been appealing to the international community for help in their reconstruction efforts. Here in Irpin, people are still living in less damaged buildings like this one. In this city, there were more than 1,000 buildings that were damaged and more than 100 that were destroyed completely as a result of the fighting.
We come back because we wanted to be in our home. Thanks to the authorities, we are slowly getting prepared, and we're trying to live, and we hope everything will be rebuilt soon.
There is a problem. We don't have enough building materials needed to finish the work. That's why we're asking charitable organizations for more help and supplies.
Many throughout Ukraine are doing all they can to aid in the reconstruction effort. But with winter fast approaching, temperatures dropping, and Russia targeting more and more of the country's power grid, Ukrainians are growing ever more concerned.
Well, Steph Vasson joins me now from Berlin, and we are expecting to hear more about the commitments or pledges for Ukraine. What are you hearing right now?
Well, the big question here in Berlin is who is going to pay for this very costly and huge reconstruction of Ukraine. There's a lot of pressure on the European Union to put up its efforts because the United States has put in more than $50 billion just mostly for military aid. The European Union has also pledged a lot of money, but only a fraction of it has already been paid. In his address through video link to the conference from Kyiv, President Zelensky basically complained that from this fast recovery fund that they have established in Ukraine, there was not a single cent being paid by any international donor so far. So that was quite a painful moment in this conference, which is all about money for the reconstruction of Ukraine. The big question, of course, is also who is willing to pay while the war is ongoing. There are estimates by the World Bank that $350 billion US dollar is needed. But this costs are going up by the day, of course, because of more destruction. Zelensky said 1/3 of all the energy facilities were already destroyed only in the last couple of weeks by Russian attacks. So there is pressure on the EU, and also the EU is saying that they want to step up because Ukraine is a candidate member for the European Union. So this whole reconstruction could be a huge benefit for Europe to have Ukraine as a very prosperous nation in the future. So with the help of a lot of donors, that could be possible. But again, it seems there's still quite some reluctance to really make commitments, and we are not really expecting any pledges or commitments today. It's going to be just the outlining of a framework, how to deal with the reconstruction of Ukraine in the future.
Steph Vasson for us there in Berlin. Thank you. Let's cross over to Kyiv now, where Harry Fawcett is standing by. And of course, you know, we talk about reconstruction, Harry, and in the past few weeks, we've seen Russia target a lot of the energy infrastructure, and some of that energy infrastructure revolves around nuclear facilities, and that's worrying potentially inspectors who want to view and get there to see what's going on.
Well, yes, and some of this is obviously the energy grid is being targeted increasingly by the Russian side, but they are also putting forward this narrative, this very concerted message coming from Russia that Ukraine intends to use an explosive laced with radioactive material, a so-called dirty bomb, in order to blame such an explosion on the Russians. That is something that's being entirely refuted here, or at least rebutted by the Ukrainian side and Western capitals as well, saying that this is transparently false and, according to the Ukrainians, could be the Russians laying the ground for doing something of this nature themselves. And so what the Ukrainians are asking for is some additional evidence to back up their side of the argument. So they've called the IAEA in, and the IAEA, the International Atomic Energy Agency, says that it will be sending inspectors into particularly the two Ukrainian nuclear facilities which Russia accuses of being in the final stage of this working up of a dirty bomb. And what we're also hearing today is from the Ukrainian atomic energy company, Energoatom, which says that the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant, Ukraine's biggest, which is currently under Russian control, that there are Russian activities there which it is very suspicious of. It says that the Ukrainian staff and the IAEA staff there aren't able to access this one area of the plant which houses spent nuclear fuel. It says there are construction works going on there carried out by the Russians in secret, that there are 174 containers of spent nuclear fuel there, each of them with 24 assemblies inside it. And when we spoke to a senior energy or other defense analyst about this situation, he said that Zaporizhzhia would be the place that the Russians would use should they want to try to engineer some kind of dirty bomb themselves. He also said, though, and this is, I think, worth giving equal weight, that to do so would be an extremely risky thing. It could be rhetoric coming from Russia trying to show that they are prepared to escalate if necessary, that they aren't backing down despite the numerous defeats they've had on the battlefield in recent weeks.
Harry Fawcett there for us in Kyiv. Thanks very much for the update, Harry. Well, still ahead here on the News Hour, we look at why black voters in Brazil could determine the winner of its tight presidential runoff. Also, a Spanish football fan goes missing while walking to the World Cup, and his parents fear the worst. That's all coming up in sport.
Anticipation is rising, and so is the atmosphere. Are you ready? The weather, sponsored by Qatar Airways.
Here's your weather update in a minute 15, and right off the top, it's not good news. The rain is piling in for the northwest of Spain, northern and central Portugal. These winds winding up as well. We'll see gusts of about 70 kilometers per hour, so quite nasty weather. And that wet weather will stream into the Republic of Ireland, the southwest of France, as we head Tuesday into Wednesday. Meantime, temperatures are on their way up through Scandinavia and still high temperatures through the Balkans, but a bit more cloud cover in Sarajevo means the temperature will be 24 degrees, and we've got some rain rolling right across Croatia on Tuesday. For Turkey, plenty of sun in the forecast, but we've got this batch of wet weather around Cairo and some showers for Jordan and Syria in the forecast on Tuesday. Off to Africa we go, and our heaviest pulses of rain will once again be southern Nigeria, but also southern Benin, Togo, and Ghana. Now, this area has been prone to flooding, and certainly we could see some more. Some severe thunderstorms firing up across South Africa's eastern Cape Province, KwaZulu-Natal. Durban, some showers in the forecast for you with a high of 29 degrees. Meantime, quite high temperatures in southern Botswana. Look at this, Gaborone, all the way up to 37 degrees with wall-to-wall sunshine on Tuesday. And now, you're in the know. We'll see you soon. Take care.
The weather, sponsored by Qatar Airways.
The dancing in Bollywood films is an important part of India's culture. So it's no surprise that many people want to work in the industry. One dancer and one choreographer try to balance family expectations and cultural traditions. With the reality of working in an unforgiving industry. Bollywood Dreams on Al Jazeera.
When the news breaks.
It's not just personal property, but also infrastructure that now needs fixing, from power lines to water mains.
When people need to be heard and the story told.
They would get punished if they spoke Ukrainian. I'm afraid I won't be able to return home.
With exclusive interviews and in-depth reports.
South African pangolins won't eat in captivity.
Al Jazeera has teams on the ground to bring you more award-winning documentaries and live news.
Welcome back. You're watching the Al Jazeera News Hour with me, Zahil Rahman, in Doha. A reminder of our top stories. Rishi Sunak is moments away from officially becoming Britain's new Prime Minister. Sunak is meeting with King Charles III in Buckingham Palace. Former Prime Minister Liz Truss has officially resigned. Also, a funeral procession is underway for Palestinians killed during an Israeli army raid in the occupied West Bank. At least 5 people were killed in Nablus and another near Ramallah. Germany is hosting a conference on rebuilding Ukraine after Russia's invasion. The president of the EU Commission said Russia's attacks on infrastructure were pure acts of terrorism. The US Justice Department says that it's charged 2 suspected Chinese intelligence officers. Washington says they were allegedly involved in a plot to disrupt the federal probe into the Chinese tech giant Huawei. The Justice Department also announced separate charges against 4 other Chinese nationals. It accuses them of trying to get hold of sensitive technology under the cover of an academic institution.
Each of these cases lays bare the Chinese government's flagrant violation of international laws as they work to project their authoritarian view around the world, including within our own borders. In all 3 of these cases, and frankly, in thousands of others, we've found the Chinese government threatening established democratic norms and the rule of law as they work to undermine U.S. economic security and fundamental human rights.
Heidi Jo Castro has more from Washington, D.C.
These 2 Chinese agents tried to bribe a U.S. law enforcement official into giving up sensitive and secret documents regarding the U.S.'s legal strategy in its prosecution of Huawei. But that, in fact, this U.S. government official was a double agent who was working under the direction of FBI and feeding these alleged Chinese spies fake documents. There were also other cases they mentioned. Another case in New Jersey where 7 Chinese nationals were charged with trying to forcibly repatriate and harass a naturalized U.S. citizen into returning to China. 2 of those that have been charged in that case have been arrested. But a big question is how the U.S. will arrest the remaining individuals who were charged if they are no longer in the U.S. or have been conducting this from China this whole time. Bigger picture here now. Again, I said that this was announced by the 2 top law enforcement officers in the U.S., the FBI director and the attorney general. And they had strong words about what they call the backdrop of malign activity from China, described as espionage, harassment, obstruction of justice, and the stealing of technology.
So let's take you our top story. Rishi Sunak is taking over as the UK's Prime Minister. This is the British capital. It's outside Buckingham Palace. The gates are opened, which must mean that the convoy of his cars must be soon to leave Buckingham Palace. He's been meeting the King to seek his permission to form His Majesty's next government. Those crowds, of course, waiting to perhaps take photographs of another moment in history. There, the Mall, where the convoy will drive up towards Whitehall and then into Downing Street. The journey is about a mile long. It should take no more than 10 to 15 minutes, and we will go live to Downing Street when the new Prime Minister addresses the nation. In the meantime, we'll speak to Mark Oswald. He's the Chief Economist at ADM Investor Services. Joins me now from London. Good to have you with us on the programme. Let's just begin with Rishi Sunak's comments of the country will experience profound economic challenges. He seems to be preparing the ground for some pretty difficult choices for not only his government and a reality that the British public will find difficult perhaps to swallow in the coming weeks.
Yes, he does. I mean, there are profound economic challenges. The cost of living and energy crisis, which is not only gripping the UK, but also more broader problems for the UK economy. Labour shortages due to skills shortages, and the general challenges of managing that transition away from the EU. So these are all actually sort of confluencing for the time being and making that even more difficult.
And indeed, inflation is hovering around 10%. We haven't seen that for a couple of decades in the UK. Add to that the fact that he also has to try and mend a fractured Tory party. But in terms of the fiscal responsibility, it's all very well to talk about spending, but you have to rejuvenate the economy. And to do that, you either have to, I presume, save money, or it requires cash injections. Where are those cash injections going to come from? Are we looking at corporate windfall taxes, or is the public expected to pay for all of this? The money has to come from somewhere.
Well, that's sort of partially the problem. What's been mooted before he won is that Mr. Hunt would basically extend the energy windfall tax, which is actually not necessarily that positive, because the more you tax the energy companies, the less likely they are to invest. And in business investment is precisely what the UK needs. It's very sluggish. The second thing which is being proposed is a windfall tax on the banking sector, largely because there is a feeling that they're not passing on the increased rates that are happening in the UK to savers. But then again, they're already taxed quite highly, and in a situation of rising interest rates, you don't want to then actually hobble the availability of credit to the UK economy.
And of course, austerity is not a word that the current government want to bring back into the conversation, but it might well be bandied around, and that the public response was very negative to it under the former Conservative Chancellor George Osborne. But, it perhaps is an inevitability, isn't it?
Well, there's a certain amount of it, but you have to also be very, very careful here. I think the one proposal which Mr. Sunak made while he was still previously Chancellor was that the measures to actually support the consumer sector in terms of the energy crisis should be targeted at those on lower incomes, which was not the case with Ms. Truss's proposals. And that's basically going to have to be the thrust of whatever they do. Where there are going to be cutbacks, it really needs to ensure that you're not harming the people on the lowest incomes in society who are already stretched to their absolute limits.
Mark, just bear with me for 1 second. We've just got some breaking news now coming in that Rishi Sunak has been appointed as the British Prime Minister. He's been given that permission by King Charles III to form the next government. And of course, we will get more on that as we see Mr. Sunak leave Buckingham Palace. Mark, obviously, we do now officially have a new Prime Minister. Rishi Sunak, in the days of COVID and during the pandemic, used very much a big state approach in terms of looking after the community at large, somewhat perhaps sensitive, unheard of for perhaps a Conservative Chancellor. Unusual for Conservative to spend. We sort of tend to think of the Labour Party having that sort of trait. Do you think that could be something that we may see more of Prime Minister Sunak doing in the weeks ahead? The big approach to help all sectors of British society?
There's going to be limits. Now, I think we ought to remember that actually, as Chancellor, he was pressured by other members of the government not to be quite so hasty. So as much as he oversaw a lot of spending during COVID, he was trying to end the furlough scheme a lot earlier than was going to be necessary, and some of the other forbearance measures. So he is on the hawkish side. So as much as I expect to see some increased spending, I think it is going to be rather limited, and that's going to be the biggest challenge for the UK economy, because Ms. Truss wasn't wrong in the point that the UK really does need a good kick-start to its economy, because it really is lagging a lot of its G7 peers.
And of course, at the end of the day, the markets are very clear about how they feel. There's been a slight, you might say, improvement, encouragement of the appointment of Rishi Sunak. What should we be looking at in the coming either weeks or months into the way the government are approaching the economy here in the UK and how the markets are reacting to them? Because obviously they're intertwined.
Yes, I mean, there's two aspects to it. One, they will really want to see that the Conservative Party is acting in a unified way. If there is any resurgence of the sort of backstabbing that we saw both under Mr. Johnson and obviously under Ms. Truss, that confidence which is being, or that benefit of the doubt which is being given to Mr. Sunak at the moment will soon evaporate. The second thing is going to be how the public react and how the Conservative backbenchers also react to the measures which are announced. Because if they sound basically that like the UK is going to have to go through a long period which is quite stagflationary, where there isn't much in the way of stimulus for the economy, and there are increasing burdens both for businesses, even if it's particular businesses, and consumers, the resurgence of disunity seems to me very, very likely.
We shall see what happens, certainly, for the time being. It's been good to speak to you, Mark Oswald, there from ADM Investor Services in London. Thank you very much for your time. Let's cross over to Andrew Simmons in Downing Street. And Andrew, obviously, we're breaking the news now that we're hearing that Rishi Sunak has been appointed by King Charles III to form His Majesty's government.
That's right. He is Prime Minister officially now, and he'll be getting in his car, his limousine, very soon. In fact, only minutes away to drive over here to his new home, number 10 Downing Street, the third Prime Minister the UK has had in only 50 days. Quite a remarkable sequence of events. He has a massive task ahead of him. In actual fact, normally at this stage, you would see crowds gathering, lots of MPs gathering at both ends of Downing Street. On this occasion, there is no one here in the way of other than the media, simply because there's been an order put out for MPs not to be hand clapping their new Prime Minister on arrival at Downing Street, because this is a serious, rather sombre occasion where the economy is in a dangerous trouble and the mood has to be contrite. There has to be, this is the word that's coming out, that MPs must be very focused on listening to their new leader outline what lies ahead, and that doesn't sound good. It sounds as if there's going to be more belt tightening. It certainly sounds as if Rishi Sunak is going to get tough, tougher than Liz Truss in many ways, and possibly tougher than the stand-in Chancellor, the Finance Minister, Jeremy Hunt, has been in outlining a whole raft of measures that reversed what Truss wanted to do. Now, Truss, when she left, spelt out exactly what she wanted to do. She tried to make things sound positive in the sense that some of her measures were executed. National insurance, for example, being cut down somewhat, and the energy programme of subsidies for British people, but then she really didn't say sorry, and it was in a way a defiant sort of speech. She was fluent. It seemed that she was quite relaxed about her departure, but then she left without that apology. So really right now everyone is waiting here for Rishi Sunak to arrive and to spell out exactly what he plans to do. Soon he'll be driving out of Buckingham Palace.
And indeed, we'll come back to you in Downing Street as and when he arrives and when he speaks to. Andrew Simmons there for us in Downing Street. Now, Brazil has the largest black population of any country outside of Africa and has long presented itself as being free of racism. And in a tight presidential runoff on Sunday, the votes of black Brazilians could determine the winner. Our Latin America editor, Lucia Newman, reports now from São Salvador de Bahia.
The port city of Salvador de Bahia in northeastern Brazil. It's where the Atlantic slave trade from West Africa to the so-called New World began. From the mid-1500s, Brazil imported more enslaved Africans than any other country, and was the last one to abolish slavery. Today, Brazil has the largest black population in the Americas, and they make up a disproportionately large percentage of the poor. The majority of black voters support former left-wing President Lula da Silva, like Jules dos Santos, who's selling beach wraps promoting his run for another term.
Who opened the doors of public universities to blacks? It was Lula. Bolsonaro only wants rich whites to have superior education.
Dudu Ribeiro, who runs an NGO called Black Initiative, is worried.
Bolsonaro's economic policy is racist, which is extremely serious, and the president's racist comments are equally serious.
As a congressman, Bolsonaro was asked what he would do if one of his sons fell in love with a black woman.
I'm not going to discuss promiscuity with you. I don't have to face that risk because my children were very well educated.
Bolsonaro also commented once that he'd seen a fat black man who weighed about 7 arrobas, an obsolete unit used to weigh African slaves. Mai Jaciara is a priestess of the Afro-Brazilian religion Candomblé. She says attacks against their temples by radical evangelical supporters of Bolsonaro are escalating.
We have a president who says there is only one religion, his own, and he is fanning intolerance. I'm afraid that this could generate great violence.
83% of Brazilians are black or mixed race, descendants of slaves who were brought here to what was one of the Western Hemisphere's largest slave markets. But despite some of President Bolsonaro's overtly racist comments and opinions, many Brazilians of color plan to vote for him. Among them are these men who perform capoeira for tourists. It's a popular Afro-Brazilian martial art.
Bolsonaro has a clean slate, a clean plate. A clean plate is better than a dirty one, don't you think? We need him to change our country.
Brazil remains an extremely unequal country, divided along racial and class lines. Whether children like these will be able to climb the social ladder could depend greatly on the outcome of Sunday's election. Lucia Newman, Al Jazeera, Salvador, Brazil.
Well, it's the World Cup is in fact getting closer. Joe's here with all of the latest news on the tournament.
Sahil, thank you very much. Well, in just 26 days, Qatar will kick off the World Cup, but the country's emir says it's faced unprecedented criticism in the 12 years since it was picked to host this tournament. Sheikh Tamim bin Hamad Al Thani called the attacks on his country defamation.
Since we won the honour of hosting the World Cup, our country has been subjected to an unprecedented campaign that no other previous host country has ever experienced. We initially dealt with the matter in goodwill, and we even considered some criticisms as positive and useful as to develop certain aspects that need to be developed. But it soon became clear to us that the campaign continues, expands, includes slander and double standards, and gets more degrees of ferocity. This has made many wonder, unfortunately, about the real reasons and motives behind this campaign.
French World Cup winner Zinedine Zidane has also told his countrymen to drop calls to boycott the tournament over migrant worker rights and focus on football. Some local authorities in France have said they won't broadcast matches in fan zones because of alleged human rights and environmental abuses. Zidane, who won the trophy in 1998, was unveiling his own wax figure in Paris on Monday and has backed Qatar's World Cup.
We need to set the controversy aside and let the game itself and the World Cup be the talking points for all the fans around the world who just want to watch football. No matter what is said on the controversy, it will never be fair, true, or appropriate. So we need to just focus on football and the competition for everyone like you, I presume, and me, who just want to enjoy the moment.
And we're just breaking into that sports bulletin with Joe, unfortunately, take you straight back to London and to Downing Street, where you can see that convoy which has the new Prime Minister, Rishi Sunak, entering that most famous street, the most famous street in the world. And of course, he is expected to address the nation at a podium in front of that very famous Black Door, number 10 Downing Street. He is about to get out of those rather large cars as he was escorted from Buckingham Palace, and there he is, first sight of the first Prime Minister of Great Britain and Northern Ireland of Asian descent, the youngest in nearly 200 years, MP for Richmond in North Yorkshire, addressing the British public and the world for the first time.
Good morning. I've just been to Buckingham Palace and accepted His Majesty the King's invitation to form a government in his name. It is only right to explain why I'm standing here as your new Prime Minister. Right now, our country is facing a profound economic crisis. The aftermath of COVID still lingers. Putin's war in Ukraine has destabilized energy markets and supply chains the world over. I want to pay tribute to my predecessor, Liz Truss. She was not wrong to want to improve growth in this country. It is a noble aim. And I admired her restlessness to create change. But some mistakes were made. Not born of ill will or bad intentions. Quite the opposite, in fact. But mistakes nonetheless. And I have been elected as leader of my party and your Prime Minister, in part, to fix them. And that work begins immediately. I will place economic stability and confidence at the heart of this government's agenda. This will mean difficult decisions to come. But you saw me during COVID doing everything I could to protect people and businesses with schemes like furlough. There are always limits, more so now than ever. But I promise you this, I will bring that same compassion to the challenges we face today. The government I lead will not leave the next generation, your children and grandchildren, with a debt to settle that we were too weak to pay ourselves. I will unite our country, not with words, but with action. I will work day in and day out to deliver for you. This government will have integrity, professionalism, and accountability at every level. Trust is earned, and I will earn yours. I will always be grateful to Boris Johnson for his incredible achievements as Prime Minister, and I treasure his warmth and generosity of spirit. And I know he would agree that the mandate my party earned in 2019 is not the sole property of any one individual. It is a mandate that belongs to and unites all of us. And the heart of that mandate is our manifesto. I will deliver on its promise. A stronger NHS, better schools, safer streets, control of our borders, protecting our environment, supporting our armed forces, levelling up, and building an economy that embraces the opportunities of Brexit, where businesses invest, innovate, and create jobs. I understand how difficult this moment is. After the billions of pounds it cost us to combat COVID, after all the dislocation that caused, in the midst of a terrible war that must be seen successfully to its conclusions, I fully appreciate how hard things are. And I understand too that I have work to do to restore trust after all that has happened. All I can say is that I am not daunted. I know the high office I have accepted, and I hope to live up to its demands. But when the opportunity to serve comes along, you cannot question the moment, only your willingness. So I stand here before you, ready to lead our country into the future, to put your needs above politics, to reach out and build a government that represents the very best traditions of my party. Together, we can achieve incredible things. We will create a future worthy of the sacrifices so many have made, and fill tomorrow and every day thereafter with hope. Thank you.
Rishi Sunak, the new British Prime Minister, has addressed the nation, telling everyone exactly what he's going to do. He's talking about the profound economic crisis and that everybody has dealt with the actual issue of COVID and the aftermath of it. The economy has also been impacted by Putin's war and the destabilisation of the markets. While he thanked actually Liz Truss for her work and for her position as Prime Minister, he said actual mistakes were made. Let's get more on this from Andrew Symonds. Short summary there, Andrew, but obviously there was a lot more that the new Prime Minister was addressing to the British public and, of course, to the markets as well.
Yes, very much so. He's just gone inside 10 Downing Street now. A little bit of applause there, but unusual scenes here because there was no one here to greet him in the way of MPs or any staff. And that was an order put out a good few minutes ahead of the arrival of the motorcade because of the nature of what he had to say, that this was a grim time for the economy. And the last thing they wanted was to be triumphalist about Rishi Sunak arriving, the youngest Prime Minister since the 18th century. This Prime Minister set out his stall in a very blunt way. He talked about a profound economic crisis. He gave some credit to Liz Truss, but said she had made some mistakes. And mistakes were made, and he was going to fix them. There were difficult decisions to come. He said that he will make a country where his words, it's not just his words, but his actions were going to count. And there would be accountability and integrity at every level. Now, he has said that before, but he gave some gratitude to Boris Johnson, but said that the 2019 landslide victory didn't belong to one person alone, and the party had to rally round with unity and move forward to combat the massive amount of money, the billions of dollars lost in the COVID pandemic. And he said he hoped to live up to the demands. And he made this assurance. He would put the needs of the British people above politics, a future worthy of the sacrifices so many people had made. Now, lots of words there, but no actions in terms of the plan yet. Obviously, this sort of news is going to be followed up by a raft of measures he's going to make before the mid-term fiscal statement, which is due next Monday. It's a short distance away. There is a lot of verification going on right now of what's in that budget. Effectively, it is a mini-budget, and that is from the Office of Budget Responsibility. And that is also perhaps going to be adjusted by his actions because he may well want to change things. This is a Prime Minister who intends to fix the economy. That's going to be an immensely long job with people suffering from high inflation, high interest rates, and lives that really are put under a big economic test right now.
It's 11 GMT, that's midday in London. You're watching Al Jazeera and coverage of Rishi Sunak, who has become officially the UK's new Prime Minister. Sunak met King Charles III at Buckingham Palace, where he was asked to form a new government. Sunak is the first British, Asian and first Hindu to lead the United Kingdom. He's also Britain's 5th Prime Minister in 6 years. Let's go back to Andrew Simmons, who's outside Downing Street, where Rishi Sunak has just been speaking for the first time as officially the UK's new Prime Minister. One of the things that people are going to be paying attention to is how he intends to deal with all the economic issues that the country is going to be facing. There is precious little detail that has been given over the last week or so for obvious reasons. Sunak has been wrapped up in this leadership race. But the hard work for Sunak now begins, because he's going to have to start appointing people to the government that he hopes is going to be able to see the country through this economic crisis.
I'm sure there are names in his head right now, and he's going to get straight to that. Expect to see it in a very short space of time. People called into Downing Street to be offered top jobs. It is very likely, in fact, it's certain, that he will try to assemble a broad church, effectively, that he'll want to unite the party. He said the Conservative Party has to either unite or die. Those were his words when he outlined his position to the 1922 Backbench Committee. He will, without doubt, want to have people who are going to support him, but people who are going to have their own minds. A collection of experts is one terminology for it. He wants to get straight to the economy as the main issue, but he also wants to try to revive some of the popularity, at least some of it, that the Conservative Party used to enjoy. Remember, it's got a good majority, more than 80 MPs, yet it's at its lowest level for several decades in terms of popularity. So he will be looking for experience, he'll be looking for loyalty, and he will be wanting to explain to the British people that he has a balanced government that represents all factions of the Conservative Party, and he'll be pursuing peace. But set this against the context of a united opposition, united in one demand, and that is for an election. This is the third Prime Minister within 50 days. The background to the way Sunak came to power was without a vote, in a very rushed process to actually replace Liz Truss, who was forced out. She didn't go of her own volition, and she wasn't working to the mandate she'd actually won over from the Conservative Party, not the British people. So there is a really long staircase of accountability here to the public. However, Sunak is absolutely crystal clear. He does not entertain any idea for an early election, for a snap election. And that's not surprising. The next election, he says, will be 2024, when it's scheduled. Now, what about his personality, his position, how he's going to go down with the British people? He is a talented man when it comes to finance. He's snappy, he's sharp. However, he is rich, and that doesn't go down well with the British public. It's very rare that you get a person, a politician, going to Buckingham Palace whose wealth exceeds that of the monarch. That is the way it's been worked out by people far more qualified than me to actually work out the worth of any individual. His wife is a multimillionaire. He's a multimillionaire. They have investments all over the world. There has been controversy in the past about the tax affairs of Sunak's wife. She now does pay UK taxes. There's a domicile issue there, but that has apparently been resolved. That is an issue with the British public. What is also an issue with the British public is his approach as a Conservative politician to working people. He's seen in his constituency in Yorkshire as an individual who likes the PR, who likes the snappy campaign slogans, but doesn't necessarily get down down and with the people who are really at low ebbs. And right now there is a YouGov Snap poll, not long in, saying that 4 out of 10, only 4 out of 10 are pleased with Sunak's appointment, and 56%, so that is a majority, want a general election now.
Andrew, for now, thank you very much indeed, Andrew Simmons, outside 10 Downing Street. Well, let's go back to that speech that Rishi Sunak made shortly after meeting King Charles III to be officially appointed as the new Prime Minister of the United Kingdom. Sunak promised to focus, as Andrew was explaining, on the UK economy.
I will place economic stability and confidence at the heart of this government's agenda. This will mean difficult decisions to come. But you saw me during COVID doing everything I could to protect people and businesses